With the framework and mechanisms of section 1 and 2 in place and working, I wanted to redesign the covering facade to be strong and efficiently built. I also wanted to make it more modular in design, to make removal easier if I were to need access for any reason. Most of the panels were easy to redesign and install, but things became a little trickier at the base of the tunnel. Here I needed attachment points for both the front and top covers, but they needed to be out of the way of the gears and chain. I didn't really want to install connectors in the top of the frames, as they'd be partly visible from certain perspectives, but I had to concede defeat with one connector due to the rising chain angle. The biggest issue was with the final plate, as there were no potential points for connection, so support had to come from the next plate over. With the plate installed, however, I found I'd made a mistake, as I'd incorrectly assumed the length of the bar on the chain link the dish was attached to was 1 unit long, when it was actually 1.5 units. This meant the bar that pushed down on the lever was now colliding with the front plate. This posed a big problem, as I'd have to reverse the bar to point in the opposite direction, but I couldn't easily move the lever over due to the gears and the frames, and it would still somehow need to push up on the axles the dust cloud was attached to. I could probably make it work if I could split the lever in half either side of the frame, but I'd need connectors with axle holes which don't exist. A single lever extended out under the dust cloud could probably have worked, but there would have been a number of issues to contend with designing a frame to support the lever, gears and other connectors. Not wanting to tear apart the nice neat framework, I reverted to the old lever, and wondered if I may be able to extend it around the largest gear to where the bar could press against it. There would still be issues to contend with, as I wanted to confine things within the area of the external covering platform. The first design kind of worked, but the lever extended beyond where I wanted an external wall, and the extra length unbalanced it, preventing it from tipping back to its first position. Swapping the angled connector for a narrower angle and moving the 24-tooth gear further inbound got me closer, but the lever would still collide with the external wall when pressed. Reducing the angle of the lever further meant its length had to be increased to clear the top of the 24-tooth gear. While a test of this design worked well and the top of the platform appeared to clear the lever, I realised there wasn't clearance to feather the platform's larger internal plate with smaller plates to connect it to the external wall. I could possibly overcome this by lengthening the platform and moving the mechanical components along, but I didn't want to shorten the distance between the tunnel and the platform, and frankly, I couldn't be bothered with the effort. So if I wanted to move the lever away from the plates, it'd need to be fixed to the inside of the frame, but how could it then push up on the dust cloud? I couldn't really move the axles over with the lever, as I'd have to lower both to bridge the gap to the cloud with a plate. I could attach lift arms to the axles, but then I'd have to remove one or both of the large frames to allow for their movement. This would be much easier if I could split the lever in half, and while staring at the design hoping for an idea to hit me, one did, as I realised the lever was further away from the frame on the outside than I'd thought. This meant I could get in the connectors with axle holes that I needed to make both halves of the lever move as one. The new design worked smoothly, and gave me all the space I needed to build the platform shell around it. With the issue resolved, I was able to carry on decorating the sections, and I'd made a decision to swap out the printed grass tiles with rounded corner tiles, as it would allow me to introduce some slight variance in ground level. While installing facade panels around the tunnel, I thought it would be a good idea to space out the studs to which the tunnel wall would connect, to make it easier to remove the tunnel, but I found there was still a tendency for things to pull apart. I made some minor modifications to the tunnel's cover and chose to rely solely on the Technic frame to support it. As I didn't have the tiles needed to finish the section, I moved back to finishing the design of section 4. Most of the textured wall was easy to design, but it became more complicated around the rock, as I couldn't be sure that what I was designing would hold together and hold to the frame. I thought the best way to tackle this would be through physically building the section and making any changes that I found were needed. There were only a couple of minor changes to the frame to give me more studs to connect to. Then I worked out how to bridge and fix the rock into a gap I'd left for it. I was a little unhappy that I'd have to use the printed tiles across the front of the rock, rather than the rounded corner tiles I was updating to. So over the weekend I found a way to install individual brackets upside down, which allowed me to make the switch. After updating the remaining areas to single rounded tiles and introducing some variance to the level of the grass, I was left with the short strip at the base of the tunnel. Because of the gap I'd had to leave for the dust cloud, I'd had to build this from multiple plates, which were partly held together only by the printed tiles fixed across the brackets. As there were no studs under the front edge, I couldn't stick down one plate under all the brackets to hold them in place, so how could I connect the front of the platform to the rear without the help of the 1x4 tiles? I wondered whether I could fix the brackets in upside down as I'd done with the rock, but that would create issues when attaching the top plate. The problematic brackets were only really the last two, so what if I used some strategic ground raising to connect them to a larger plate? Structurally it held together well, but how well would the sonic ball run over those bumps? Thankfully it ran without issue. I had left a little extra slack in the chain to help it navigate the tunnel's curves, so that was playing to my advantage here. While the plates were holding together nicely, the way in which they'd been connected to the build had been bugging me, as every time I tried to reconnect them, the Technic plates would pivot away. If I wanted to use 1x2 Technic bricks with 2 pinholes, I'd have to relocate the connection points and possibly fix into the top of the frame again. If I wanted to use standard Technic bricks, I'd have to use offset connectors to counter the offset studs. When testing whether a pair of longer bricks might work, I realised that I'd lose the connection points for the front panel, as there was no room for connectors under the bricks. But fixing in shorter bricks would probably be more work than the 1x2s with 2 holes. Rather than connect to the top of the large frames, I used some of the recent flip-flop lift arms to give me connection points in the tops and sides.